I think that essentially you've got to sort of put all this into perspective, because we know that 80% of people with autism have a sleep problem. So that's huge.
80%.
Why people 80,
Yeah.
and most health professionals don't have any training in sleep other than about half an hour. So, which is a bit shocking, but that's that's what's on the curriculums
only a bit less than
in
they
med
have
schools at
training
the
in
moment.
autism, right? For lots of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, your body clock, part of it sort of regulating itself in terms of knowing when it's time to sleep and time to be awake, is kind of run by the melatonin either being high enough or low enough to be awake. So we need our melatonin to increase in order to sleep. And that's melatonin, the hormone, is naturally produced in the body. We can do things to help boost and encourage that melatonin production.
Anything which involves what we know to be proprioceptive sense. So, it's that sense of, I'm holding my hand in a fist here. I don't need to sort of, look at it and see that I'm doing that. I know. And it's that whole sense of tenseness in all your joints is hugely calming. Okay. It's a default setting for all of us.
Hello and welcome to the Stories About Autism podcast. My name is James and I'm your host, and I'm a dad of two boys, Tommy and Jude, who are both autistic. Each week on the podcast I get to speak to a special guest who shares their own story about autism. I speak with autistic adults, parents of children who are autistic, and professionals who work with the autism community too. There will also be some episodes where I talk a little bit more about me and my boys, share our own experiences, and answer some of your questions, so make sure to look out for those. This week I'm joined by Jan, Jenna and Tabitha Moynihan from Hunrosa. Hunrosa is a sleep consultancy made up of sleep consultants who are also psychologists, OTs, nurses, teachers, and who have specialist knowledge in supporting families with neurodiverse children. Sleep, or lack of it, is a topic I get asked about all the time on my socials, from parents desperate to try and figure out what they can do to make sleep better in their house. I know only too well how tricky it can be for some autistic or neurodiverse people to get good sleep, and the impact it can have on the family as a whole. I've had many years of little or constantly broken sleep, and it really wasn't fun. Luckily, it's gotten a lot better as we've entered the teenage years, but I wish I'd had some of the advice that Jan and Tabitha share with me back then when I really needed it. I think this episode is going to be really useful for anyone who wants to understand why sleep is such a challenge and what some of the options are to help it improve. Hunrosa have some great free resources available too that you can find the links to in the show notes. I really hope you get a lot out of today's episode and that it's the first steps to better sleep in your home. Let's get to it. Here's my chat with Tabitha and Jan from Hunrosa. Okay, I'm joined by Jan and Tabitha from Hunrosa Sleep today to answer all of your questions about sleep and autism, and how I put a post out on Stories About Autism page and it was inundated with questions. I know all too well from my own experiences with Tommy and Jude about how difficult sleep can be, and I know lots of you out there have challenges too. So Tabitha, Jan, hello. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Yes, definitely.
It's a really important topic. Let's start with a little bit, if you give us an intro about you and what Hunrosa Sleep is.
Hi, I'm Tabitha and I'm one of the sleep consultants at Hunrosa. So I work as part of a team. Hunrosa is a sleep consultancy, and we run NHS contracts and do private consulting as well. And we consider ourselves to be very good at what we do. We really love to help people with their sleep, so families and households. So my background was actually in early years teaching, and then I got into the world of sleep and have been practicing for some years now. And I just absolutely love it. I'm really passionate about it. I just think when we can improve sleep for families, it just transforms people's lives, and it really does. And it's just wonderful seeing the results that we get in giving people support with their sleep.
And just
I'll let Jan tell you about Hunrosa.
Hunrosa. I've been in the whole sort of field of sleep medicine since 2009, when so many more people thought, gosh, is that a thing? And since then, we had private practice, but then we've continued that on. But we also now work with the NHS as a provider on a regular basis to deliver sleep services in the southwest. And I just sort of we work alongside a lot of families who have young people with autism, and I am just so humbled by the effort that families put into working with us, and how they are. I think it's great when we produce our annual report, as you do every year for the NHS, and it's great to see the results that come through on that. Every young person last year resolved their sleep problem who came through our sleep programs, so you can't get better than that. I have a brilliant team working alongside me. Thankfully, it's not all me, and they're sort of scattered around England. And we work online with families and young people to improve their sleep. We've got the Sleepwise app, which is intended for parent carers and professionals as well, to have a look at their young person's sleep. It's available on the stores, and it essentially will guide you through a sleep diary, and then, or if you already know how much or how little your young person sleeps, then it will guide you to resources that are relevant to to your actual situation.
I think that's really important, because I know from my own experiences in the past of waiting to get to speak to sleep experts from referrals and that whole time in between, when I'm guessing the app cuts a lot of that out. There's a lot of stuff you can be doing, and like you said, sleep diaries and recording.
Totally.
If you can simply just access it today, it gets you started, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and knowing it's trusted resources as opposed to just kind of Googling online and seeing what you've come up with.
Yeah,
definitely.
We've also got the on our website. We've got the they're called Sleepwise takeaway cards, and they're for specific scenarios and situations, right up to people of the age of 25. So from preschoolers right up to then, and all sorts of subjects like good bedtime routine, as you'd expect, but things about looking at someone's window of opportunity for sleep. How can you make that as good as possible? And also, there's some aimed at specifically at young people as well. So there's some ones for young people if they can't sleep, because I don't think sometimes young people that come to us, they really are worried that they can't sleep. So
Right.
sometimes it is that the parent is they've got to sleep, but it can be the other way around as well. And those cards are available free online, and they are they've actually been commissioned by the NHS as well. So they're reliable cards that are in use in the NHS and available for the NHS family as well.
Perfect. So all of those links will be available on the show notes of this episode. So anyone listening, make sure you check it out there. So let's start with, I think probably the biggest question is, why do so many autistic people, or why do so many neurodiverse people struggle with sleep? I know from my own experiences with Tommy and Jude that sleep has been a real challenge over the years. It's one of the things I didn't expect. I assumed that when I had a child that we'd sort of expected maybe some sleepless nights in the first year or two, but then we'd hit a natural rhythm and things would get better. And I'd say probably the first 10 years-ish, there was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of either going to bed very late or waking up for 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night. And it was a shock to me, and it's something, obviously, as I've met more and more families and spoke to more and more people, it's something that is relatively common. So what's the reason behind it? Is there any science behind it that explains possibly why it's such a challenge?
I think that essentially you've got to sort of put all this into perspective, because we know that 80% of people with autism have a sleep problem. So that's huge.
80%.
Why
Yeah.
people 80, yes. I mean, the research is between 70 and 80, but it's more or less 80 now. It's coming up as 80. We're getting to find out more about sleep more and more, especially during the last 10 years. The amount of research projects that have gone on generally in the general population are huge, but also including this population too. And similar figures for people with ADHD as well. So, we know that whole umbrella of neurodiversity, as they call it, will, have sleep problems. And therefore, we also know that, we're trying to work out why, and we generally understand from research that people don't produce as much melatonin, the hormone that we all have within our bodies that actually promotes a good body clock. Then we don't, that it tends to be at lower levels for people with autism. And there's some quite amazing studies that have been done on babies who eventually end up with an autism diagnosis. And they have noticed from the get-go their whole sleep structure is different. So
Really?
I think that, we talk, we talk about, there's, as Tab sort of alluded to as well, there's a whole thing around for parents, I must be doing something wrong, I must, that whole guilt thing about, well, it's obviously something I'm doing, that's why they're not sleeping. And by the way, I'm a parent of an autistic young person as well. So, there's the whole guilt trip about, that must have been something that I did. But they know from the get-go that the whole sleep structure of babies who end up being diagnosed with autism is different. So in that sort of whole area, we believe there needs to be more recognition and more support for parents in the whole realm of sleep. That's why there's specific, if you look on the NICE guidelines around how to treat sleep and autism, there is specific guidelines around you must have a sleep assessment before you have medication even, and an effective sleep assessment, not something like maybe a GP or whatever could deliver, but something effective, because they know it's a problem.
Yeah.
So that there is, that we know that there's issues there. The other thing that we address when we work with families and young people is the whole sensory differences side of things. And we know that, I know one young person said, I can't sleep when I feel fizzy and wizzy. And, I thought, well, that's very, that is just encapsulating the whole thing. It is true. If you're really wound up about something, you're not going to sleep. So what we do, we have some occupational therapists on our team, and we've also produced some resources for the team to use as well around the whole sensory difference side of things. Sometimes, it's great if the family are working already with an occupational therapist, because we can talk to the occupational therapist and say, what are the things that we need to put in place in the bedtime routine that will help with those sensory differences? So whilst we have that whole debate about the melatonin side of things, and the melatonin's low, you can chuck as much melatonin as you want at somebody, but if they are over alerted because they are sensory different in certain ways, particularly sense of touch, and particularly we will work with the vestibular sense, so the sense of balance. So whether you're sort of lying in bed flat, or whether you're sort of standing up, or those sort of things, your sense of balance, that affects sleep hugely.
Right.
So we work with those sort of things and see how can you bring yourself down so that you're in a calm yet alert state to sleep.
That's really interesting, especially it's information that I kind of know, but I think sometimes you have to hear it again to really sink in. And the sensory side is something that, I agree, is really, really important. I know on day-to-day functioning, when my boys are more regulated in a sensory way, they have a better day and probably have a better sleep that night as well. So So I can see how that's really important. You mentioned the M word. That's something that I get asked about a lot. And so I think we'll start there with melatonin. And do you want to tell everyone, like I said, I get asked, I get loads of DMs from people saying about their child not sleeping. Have I ever tried melatonin? Is it good? Does it work? Etc. Etc. So should we dive into the world of melatonin and explain a little bit about what it is?
I think a lot of the time people don't know what melatonin is or how it works. So, Jan's already mentioned it earlier, but so we all naturally produce melatonin. Melatonin is your kind of sleepy hormone. I think it's sometimes known as the Dracula hormone. Because it comes out at night. So essentially your body clock, part of it sort of regulating itself in terms of knowing when it's time to sleep and time to be awake, is kind of run by the melatonin either being high enough or low enough to be awake. So we need our melatonin to increase in order to sleep. And that's melatonin, the hormone, is naturally produced in the body. We can do things to help boost and encourage that melatonin production. But as Jan already mentioned, some people, particularly neurodiverse people, don't necessarily produce as much natural melatonin as somebody else. So melatonin that can be prescribed is a synthetic version of that hormone. And that is what is sometimes used to help promote sleep, essentially. So it's not a sleeping tablet. It's not like other medication that is going to essentially sedate. It's a synthetic hormone. So I think that's really important to understand.
And you've mentioned it's obviously a synthetic hormone and we all have it. We produce it naturally. So is that why it works for some and not for others?
Sorry, I'm just going to add to what Tabitha said as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The way that the hormone works is it will, as we say, reinforce the body clock. So, and it will affect the body clock hugely. So, there are two peaks of melatonin. If for someone who's having regular sleep, so for an adult, then there's a peak of melatonin as you go to bed, as you'd expect, and that peak will continue into the early hours of the night. So sometimes you get people who wake up really early in the morning because their melatonin has just done its bit.
Right.
And that's as much melatonin as there is, and then their body temperature starts increasing, and they think, oh, it's time to wake up. There's another peak which is mid-afternoon, well, sort of between 2-3 in the afternoon. For some, it can
Post-lunch
alter.
slump.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people say, oh, it's because I had a really good lunch. And it's not that, actually. It could possibly be a little bit of that, but the main reason is because of your melatonin production. And coincidentally, it's the most frequent time that there's accidents on the roads as well. It's also,
Really?
very often the time that school run goes on. But Mediterranean, that's when they go to sleep.
I was just going to say, is that why we produce that spike then? Because lots of people do have a nap then.
I think if you look back into history, there is some evidence to suggest that in the medieval times, even in this country, we used to sleep in a biphasic way. So, which is the technical term for what, having a siesta and having a shorter night's sleep. Is it wrong? Is it bad? If it fits with your lifestyle, is there a problem? Yeah. I mean, I think that this is the conversation that, we sometimes have with people. It's about looking at sleep in those, if sleep is going to be easier to achieve, then do that. So that's how it works. But yeah, did you want me to talk a bit more about the melatonin as in the prescribed version then?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions I get are, is it safe? What's how long can I take it for? Or, it's not working for my child. Why does it work for my friend's child and not mine?
Yeah. Because possibly that's not the reason your child's wakeful, I would say. could be something else. It's not, as Tabitha said, it's not a like a sleeping pill. And by the way, sleeping pills only mimic sleep. They don't actually. Melatonin is probably one of the few things that actually reinforces your natural processes, because it is a fairly natural thing, although it's synthetic. For some young people with autism, yeah, they do need it. Do all parents want a pill to resolve their child's sleep problems? Sometimes when they're desperate, yes. And what we find is that far better, and parents often like this better, is that and the young person as well, because there can be huge difficulties sometimes in getting a young person with autism to take medication. Sometimes, and very often we find that if you put in other things, then that can be as effective as medication. So we're not saying you shouldn't take it. And actually, in our NHS work, it becomes very obvious to us sometimes and fairly quickly that somebody needs melatonin. So we will advocate for them and say, this person needs a prescription. But having said that, that's, if they haven't tried anything to sort of modify. So in other words, if your young person is really alerted and really sensory and all over the place, and they wake up and go to sleep at all sorts of times of the day and night, we would work with you to sort of try and regulate that as much as possible. But if sleep was still then, after all that we've done, difficult to achieve, we would then sort of say, well, you need this prescription. Now, does that take a long time to achieve? Well, certainly we, from the get-go, when we involve families in the work that we do, probably by month, 6 weeks, if someone needs this medication.
Okay. Yeah.
And I haven't met a parent yet who's desperate for, who wants to give medication to their child long term. And to answer your question about is it safe, it's not licensed for use in the UK in young people. So therefore, you will get a lot of mixed messages on that. So you will get GPs saying it's not safe, for example, but it's actually different. There's not been enough research on it. So it may be fine, but we don't know. If your young person is on melatonin and it's working, then, and it's prescribed by, because again, if you buy it off the internet, you don't know what's in it. That's the other thing. I would highly recommend, if it is working, to get a prescription and use that as evidence that you need the prescription. But far better to provide some sort of sleep plan, which is what NICE recommends, that we would, advocate, and see then if the prescription is needed. But even if they are taking it on a regular basis, I think that it's important to have breaks to make sure it's still working. So maybe if you know that your young person definitely needs it during school times, term time, then maybe, this coming half term, don't have melatonin, see what happens. Is it still working? Do they need a lower dose? We're always working towards seeing how we can bring the dose down. And we tend to say, the maximum 6 milligrams. If it's not going to work after 6 milligrams, it doesn't tend to. So, you've really got an idea then. But it has to be, I could go on, it has to be relevant to the child's weight. And there's advice around that for prescribers. So sometimes it can be a tiny amount that works really well. It's almost like a placebo effect. But sometimes you need a really large amount because the young person is 6'4". So so you do, it's not a one size fits all. And to be honest, you do need to know this person who's prescribing it does know what they're doing. Not all health professionals do, and I think that it's understandable because most health professionals don't have any training in sleep other than about half an hour. So, which is a bit shocking, but that's that's what's on the curriculums
only a bit less than
in
they
med
have
schools
training
at the
in
moment.
autism, right? For lots of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
I
other
know.
thing, the other thing when it's prescribed, I think, the situation we're in these days, isn't it, is that the long periods between appointments. So,
Yeah.
that your young person might be prescribed melatonin to try, but ideally that would be reviewed really quite quickly, like James said, to make sure the dose is correct. And I think often it's prescribed as right, let's just try this. And then it's, weeks or months before it's reviewed. And so then the family are left feeling, oh, it doesn't work, but actually it's perhaps just not been the correct dose all along.
Yeah.
So there's that to bear in mind. And I think, what Jan said earlier, what the recommendations are, and because the evidence says that melatonin is way more effective when it's used alongside a behavioral sleep intervention, so like a sleep plan, which is essentially what we do. And I think, again, sometimes, people talk about melatonin as this kind of save the day scenario, which it might do, but it's going to be much more effective alongside a sleep plan. And we talk about giving families the tools they need so that, if the melatonin stops working, or there comes to a point where actually maybe the young person doesn't want to be taking it anymore, you've got the underpinning of a really effective sleep plan, which also reveals when you don't need the melatonin, because the sleep plan just on its own is what's needed and resolves things. So it's kind of, I think melatonin is sort of put out there as this thing on its own that might fix everything, and actually there's more to it than that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. And I think that just one last thing that I would say is just to bear in mind that there are different formulations. So basically there's the liquid, which obviously is immediate release. Then that's usually prescribed for tinies. And then there's a tablet form with equally immediate release. And then there's slow release, which is a tablet form, and that can come in two varieties, the usual size tablets, and also for people with swallowing difficulties, there's a very small tablet, which is relatively new on the market for use in young people with autism. And by definition, there's not vast numbers that are going to be eligible for that, because your young person would need melatonin in the first place, but also have a swallowing difficulty. So those are the people that are intended to aim at. But in the great and glorious day when we can test on everything, there are tests around to see how much melatonin someone produces, but they're used in research only at the moment, and they're just not available for the general public or even for us. And so it's very much trial and error. Does this work or doesn't it? And it sounds like a blunt instrument, but that's the way with most medications, I think, really.
True. This is true. And I think Tabitha, you mentioned there about having the ideal is the melatonin would go alongside a solid sleep plan, and that's what's going to give you the long-term benefits. So let's jump into that. I know Hunrosa is very much about the individual and coming up with a plan for the child or the person that you've met and their specific needs. But if we can generalize a little and talk about if we talk about the sleep routine and actually getting to sleep that evening time, what's some of the things that parents and families can do to try and make that whole routine smoother, make it easier for their child to go to bed and hopefully go to sleep a lot quicker?
I mean, I was just thinking, James, I think was it last week or the week before? I think you put a story or a post about the routine that you have with, I think, Tommy for
Yes.
bedtime.
Yeah.
And I loved it because it was so clear. So I think sometimes the less confident we get with our child's sleep, the more kind of all over the place things can become, or we try something different every evening, or we're not too sure, or we sort of wobble a bit, whereas actually routine is something that's repeatable and predictable. And essentially, we sometimes talk about the bedtime routine acting as little signposts to the brain that sleep is coming, almost like waving a flag, this way to sleep, this way to sleep, and our brains are hugely associative. So every step of the bedtime routine helps the brain associate that with sleep. So when we talk about having a bedtime routine, we're talking about what would help our child on that route to sleep. So it doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing. It doesn't have to be 50 million books a night. It can be very simple, but the point is that it's repeatable steps that you can do every evening before bed. We talk about not letting that routine become too long and drawn out. So I think sometimes children can become quite anxious before bed and before sleep. And if you have a sort of 2-hour wind down bedtime routine scenario, it just gives you 2 hours to build up in anxiety. So, keeping it kind of succinct is helpful. For a lot of the children and young people we work with, we often find things like visual guides can be helpful, sort of now and next type ideas. So you might, even create like a sort of chart that you and your child can point to for the different steps. And again, it's just really familiar, really kind of a comfort that nothing's going to change from what's been planned.
Yeah.
So that in itself can be really helpful. And I guess it's just thinking, is this step helping towards sleep, or is this step in this routine actually taking us further from sleep? So, for one child, we've touched on sensory things, I think, but, for one child, actually what they need is a good old bounce on the trampoline as part of their bedtime routine to just get some energy out or to have some of that sensory input. Whereas for another child to bounce on the trampoline, 20 minutes before they're meant to be going to bed is like the worst thing in the world in terms of just stimulating them. So a bedtime routine has to be very personal to that child and their needs, really.
Yeah, I think I really sort of reiterate that. It's really important to sort of just really watch to see the things that calm your child, and really try and put as many of those things into that routine, but without it being hugely, onerous, and something that is repeatable in other places, possibly if you go somewhere, maybe on holiday or something like that, so it's not something really outlandish that you can't do. So if you like camping a lot, and you've got to have that screen there for a certain amount of time, then, is that repeatable in a tent? Probably not. So it's about being aware of some of the things that, perhaps, might not work, bearing in mind that a lot of young people who are neurodiverse really do thrive off routine and reliability and no nasty surprises. And also that thing around the sensory side as well, just taking out those really alerting things. So sometimes we find that for some young people, their parents will say, oh gosh, brushing their teeth is a real battle, and we have to make sure that they brush their teeth. And you sort of think, okay, if it's a battle, then let the young person brush their teeth and you have a really good go in the morning, and then you don't get all that sort of, certainly a young person we're treating now, he has a shower and he hates showers. So you take the shower out, it's sort of like, but I think because people are really hugely sleep deprived, they don't see these things. And, we have the advantage of parachuting in and sort of saying, well, why is that going on then? We also have the disadvantage of parachuting in because we work with the parent and say, well, look, this is our take on this. What's happening? What do you think? Do you think this is going to work with your wider family? So we work together in a collaborative way to produce something that will work for the whole family.
I've got quite a nice example of a family I worked with recently, little 7-year-old boy who he's got ADHD, and they were just struggling a couple of things with the bedtime routine. One, that just the amount of physical energy he had at the end of the day, and two, transitions were especially difficult for him. So that moment from being downstairs, the transition to having to go upstairs to get ready for bed was really the killer, because that was where the sort of meltdown happened because of that. So we had a look at that, and we were sort of thinking what his sensory needs were, what was helpful to him, what they found in the past was calming for him at other times in the day. And so what we've ended up coming up with as part of the bedtime routine is that he gets the warning that 5-minute and then 2-minute warning was about the right amount for sort of, it's going to be time to go upstairs to get ready for bed. But then when it's time to get ready for bed, the way they go upstairs now is they always do it with a wheelbarrow, you know, where you hold the child's ankles and then they wheelbarrow up the stairs, like on their hands. And when I first suggested it, the mums just thought it was hilarious, but actually it's worked really nicely because it's really helped with that transition, because the little boy really enjoys it. It's giving him that feedback, so he's having to really work hard in his arms, so it's also using up some physical energy. It's giving him the sensory feedback that helps him. It's also actually really helped with the sort of connection and relationship between either parent that does it and the little boy, and also the siblings. Sometimes the siblings get involved as well, so it's actually turned what was a particularly difficult moment in the bedtime routine into something that's actually really kind of benefited the whole family, actually, and made an improvement to just the overall relational connections as well between the whole family. So I just thought that's a nice example of where we can look at a bedtime routine and bring something in that's, you know, respecting kind of the sensory needs, but also helping with those transitions and the bonus of actually sort of improving relationships along the way. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I think that seems to be quite a common thing of getting to that bedtime period and your child still having lots of energy, still being, you know, bouncing off the walls, lots of energy to burn. And I've definitely seen that with Tommy over the years, and you know, he's in a really good routine now, but he probably up until he goes into bed, he's full, you know, maybe that last half an hour he finally starts winding down, but before that he is full of energy. You know, the wheelbarrow thing sounds great. Is there any other exercises or activities that families could do sort of just before bed to try and get some of that sensory feedback and burn some energy?
Gosh, I think there's a huge different variety of things in terms of those sort of exercises. So those sort of stretching. So for some young people, you know, they can be quite organised with some yoga stretches, even that sort of thing. But you know, the whole sort of push pull type thing, doing you know, a plank sometimes, you know, those sort of Pilates planks where you're sort of, you know, anything which involves what we know to be proprioceptive sense. So, you know, it's that sense of, you know, I'm holding my hand in a fist here. I don't need to sort of, you know, look at it and see that I'm doing that. I know. And it's that whole sense of tenseness in all your joints is hugely calming. Okay. It's a default setting for all of us. That's why we have things like stress balls, you know, squeeze them, because that is really, really calming. Now, for some young people, perhaps those, you know, who maybe they're wheelchair users or whatever, then they will need to do that, you know, have that sort of thing, you know, have those fidgets, that sort of thing, which will be calming and will produce that that sort of feeling within their body. And as Tab said, you know, for that young person, it's that whole pushing down, doing a wheelbarrow. So it's the sense of proprioception all up the arms, across the chest. All that's very calming. And even carrying a basket of laundry, you know, that sort of thing, that heavy lifting, the heavy work, as the occupational therapists call it, is calming. And so incorporating those sort of things in. Some young people, you know, they can benefit from things like compression sheets on the bed, which are quite stretchy. And you know, pushing against that. Some young people may have a weighted blanket, which you know, again, sometimes it's nice to use in the run up to bed rather than in bed, because you can get very, very warm with them. So sometimes it'd be quite nice to just sit there with the, you know, and that sort of whole weight, and then having to push against the weight. I mean, for so that some parents who I mean, it's very often a go-to thing, isn't it, for some people, again, to buy a weighted blanket. And I would say with that, particularly as it's getting warmer, just bear in mind that, you know, your body temperature can go up when you use a weighted blanket, can keep you nice and toasty, but actually that's as disruptive as anything in terms of sleep. We know that, you know, we don't sleep in heat waves, similar thing. And that whole effect of the weighted blanket, that pushing against it, doesn't happen when you're asleep. Once you're asleep, you're not going to push against that blanket. So
Right.
it's a good
Yeah.
idea if your young person falls asleep when the weighted blanket's on, take the weighted blanket off, because they won't be getting any benefit other than it warming them up. So compression sheets are quite good because they're breathable.
Yeah. Yeah. Tabitha, you mentioned my post about Tommy's routine, and it just got me thinking there's actually a couple of steps of it that I take for granted are just part of his routine, but actually meet some sensory needs. Like every night he will sit on the sofa with a blanket on. Even now, it's warm. He doesn't need a blanket, but we'll both sit there with blankets on us, and it's that clearly is helping him wind down. Then he has his shower, and when he gets out of the shower and I wrap him in a towel, we do two big squeezes where I pick him up and give him a
Brilliant.
squeeze.
Yeah.
And it's just two because that's the routine and he finds it funny. And I always think of it as it's just part of his routine. But actually, it's probably meeting a bit of a sensory need as well and helping him.
Definitely.
Totally.
Him wind down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, textbook.
So we're helping. All these things can help our kids get to sleep. We then know that lots of them have problems waking up in the middle of the night, and then potentially being awake for 2, 3, 4 hours. I've been there many, many nights with Jude back in the day where he would, if he went asleep before midnight, he would wake up about 2 o'clock and he'd be awake till 5, 6 a.m., which clearly isn't good for him, isn't good for the parents, isn't good for trying to get to school in the morning, get to work, etc., etc. What do we do in that situation? What can we do to try and help our kids get back to sleep faster and just have a better quality sleep overall?
Gosh, well, there's all sorts of things that could be going on there. But I'll just try and be hugely broad brush and say a few things that we find help. Certainly, when a young person gets to around puberty, their sleep changes, and this is typically developing kids as well as those with autism. And they may be sleeping fine, and then suddenly they'll shift to want to go to bed later, get up later. And, there's this whole thing around, teens must get 10 hours a night.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. And something that we work to a lot is, it's actually an American resource, but it is sneakily used in the NHS in the UK as well. It's the National Sleep Foundation's average sleep needs, which, funny old thing, are not just, one size fits all. They are a range. So a young person may be perfectly fine on just 7 hours sleep, for example. You sort of think, gosh, that sounds a very short amount of time. You will know this because they're not tired during the day and they don't complain feeling fatigued or tired in any way. What we tend to advise is that, certainly when, and body, and the body changes during sort of like primary school years. Again, there's quite a bit of variability in the amount of sleep you need. So it's just being aware that, perhaps they do need less sleep or they need more sleep. But again, you sort of go with your everyday life experience. But I think that certainly for some young people with autism, they definitely need more sleep. And as you say, they wake up and it's all over the place. So what I would say is that your most crucial time of the day, turn it on its head, particularly for teens, is the wake time. And it's about regularizing that sleep. It's a horrible word, regularizing, but that's the way that the thing that they use in the sleep industry. It's almost like the bedtime routine, to an extent, can sit to one side and all the pressure is off that end. It's about the wake time. It's about making sure that generally over 7 days, because the brain doesn't work on a 5-day week and then a weekend, over the 7 days you regularize your sleep. So that's the first go-to that I would recommend. I mean, there's huge amount of other things, but we know that by regularizing the sleep, so say if they have to get up at 7 o'clock for school, then generally that's going to help with this whole sleep quality. If you then set that as the wake time for 7 days a week, perhaps have an hour's lie in on a Saturday, but don't sleep in, because what happens then is that you get hugely short slept during the week, and then you try and make up for it during the weekend, and the brain doesn't work like you could. There are things that you won't be able to remember. There are things, and this is generally, for all of us, not just for these young people. But if you sort of regularize your sleep, it's really, really helpful. And you may find, just by doing that one simple thing of then thinking, well, okay, they then need 9 hours sleep. The wake time is 7 hours. Work back 9 hours. Oh, they need to go to bed at 10 o'clock. Okay, so that's now that's not saying they rush around until 10 o'clock. They have a chill out time for an hour, half an hour before bed, but that's the time they're in bed. And that one simple thing of regularizing it is really, really powerful, and can act towards wake ups, because you can't make someone sleep if they're not able to. There is that. So that's just one thing. The other thing I would say as well is that something that we do is, we'll look at those wake ups and make sure that they can be as if the child is waking up, then how can we get from here to there? How can we help the parent to be able to help the child to go back to sleep? Because we know that everybody wakes. I mean, adults usually wake about 5 times a night and go back to sleep. We don't realize we've done it, but we do. And anyone who's got, say, like a wearable Fitbit, that sort of thing, they'll see, those sort of sleep stages with wake ups, which is quite a revelation to some parents, saying, well, gosh, they wake up, but then they settle themselves back down to sleep. So if your young person is waking up once a night, okay, I would say, okay, that's great news, because actually they can settle themselves back to sleep the 4 other times. So, what are we doing in that one time that is going to help them to go back to sleep that one time, because they can do it. That's I'm sure, Tabitha, you've got heaps to add, because this is such a big question, James. We need a series.
I know. Well, the problem is as well, right? It comes down to the individual, doesn't it? And that's what you're saying, Jan. Basically, it's hard to give broad brushstrokes because every situation is different. But I think what Jan said about regularizing the sleep is just so important, because I think one of the worst things as a parent, being a sleep deprived parent, is being woken in the night and just thinking, I don't even know, are they going to go back to sleep at all? Is this now like a 3-hour slot? You just feel utterly out of control, and you lose all confidence in the ability to help your child sleep. And I just think it's a horrible place to be. And I think what's so nice about focusing on that morning wake time is we're looking at what we can control, not what we can't control, because actually you can get yourself tied up in a knot over all the things that you're not getting right. But actually, if you can just focus, okay, but I can actually control what time I wake my child up, which just sounds crazy. But as Jan said, that regularizing the morning wake time gives you something that you're in control of. But basically the risk as well as everything Jan said, is that when you've had a night where you and your children have been up for 3 hours, the temptation then is to have a 3-hour lie-in and just to kind of compensate in other ways, or to go to bed extra early the following night. And that does the opposite of regularizing sleep. It allows the sleep to just free fall into something completely different. So again, what Jan said is just so important, that regularizing the sleep keeps a hold of it, stops the train from, what's the phrase, stops the horse from bolting, so I think that's really helpful, because it's something you can feel you've still got control over. And I think what Jan was saying, we talk about knitting our sleep cycles together. So where you get these nights where the young person is awake and can't go back to sleep, it's like there's a problem there with the process of, you know, joining those sleep cycles together. And I think I don't think there's an easy answer, because again, it's going to be different for every child. And, you know, I think, James, you mentioned to us earlier when we were chatting, you know, sometimes it needed to be, for example, co-sleeping is the way, because you can respond quickly enough that you can settle the child and just they'll go back to sleep quickly. Whereas if it takes you 5 or 10 minutes to kind of come around yourself, go into their room, by then they're sort of up and starting the day kind of thing. So it's knowing what's going to be helpful and work for you, but thinking in your mind at all times, what I do now, is this likely to make it more likely they'll fall back to sleep, or is it going to make it less likely? So it's tempting to, I don't know, take them downstairs and put the TV on and make a hot drink, just as a means of survival. But actually, those things are all quite alerting. They're very pleasant and rewarding. You might argue that they're not going to help with the attitude of trying to fall back to sleep. So it's kind of looking at how you interact in those moments as well. But it's so dependent on the individual, I think. So it's hard to give a brushstroke.
Yeah,
it is. And I think as well, sometimes it's allowing the young person to actually, say, well, I know you're going to be awake. You know, if they're able to be safe and not disturb the rest of the house, here's something to do. Here's some colouring or some Lego. You can get out of bed. You've got a little pop-up tent in the corner. You can go and sit in your safe space. And if you need to fall asleep there, that's fine. Because bearing in mind that, we also treat adults with insomnia as well. And one of the bits of wisdom that we give them is, if you do wake up regularly, then don't lie there worrying, because you'll inevitably start worrying about family, work, etc., 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 and because the brain's not working, fully. We will say to them, go and do something different, go and do something dull, even watch telly for half an hour and then try and go back to sleep. Take your mind off it and go back to sleep after half an hour. And in that time, your sleep cycle, which is still chugging along, and bearing in mind that these kids, with sensory differences, they will probably not clock that they're feeling tired or ready for sleep. They'll need to have it pointed out to them, perhaps. It's time for sleep. Do you feel tired? So they might need some help from an adult. But, for adults, we say to them, after that time, try and go back to sleep, because that's when your sleep cycle is there, and, you're more likely to feel tired. Not when you've been up, you've woken up, you're worried, and and for a young person, what's happened in school today? What's happened tomorrow? Oh no, I've got that subject. Oh, I hate PE. Got sports day. Oh, why do they still do sports day? I don't know, but there we are. Horrible things. We always get kids who get really stressed. You don't sleep because of sports days, and you sort of think, why are they still doing sports days? Anyway. Just a plug there.
I was going to say as well, it sort of joins the two things together, the getting your child to sleep and then the how you handle wake-ups in the night. Because I think, again, it's sort of what you've already said, Jan. I think the timings, when we're working with families, we always look at sleep diaries for lots of different reasons. But one of the useful things with sleep diaries is seeing those timings, because actually sometimes we find, a parent has come to us saying, my child wakes for at least 2 hours every night, and we look at the sleep diary and what Jan was saying, that the child's actually being put to bed inappropriately early. And so every person will take their amount of sleep, and they're unlikely to take more sleep than they need. So if say you need 8 hours of sleep, but someone's putting you to bed for 10 hours, then you're going to have 2 hours of wakefulness in your bedtime period. So it is about matching that time in bed to your sleep need, rather than the parent just feeling obliged to give a stipulated bedtime and sticking to that. So I think it's really difficult, particularly children that go to school, because they come home absolutely exhausted, and particularly, if they've got additional needs or neurodiversity, that means actually they are exhausted. And then you've got this tension between managing that tiredness, but not letting them go to bed so early that then they're likely to wake in the night. So it's a bit of a difficult tightrope to walk, but getting that bedtime right alongside that regularized morning slot, I think is really helpful.
And we can let you have copies of the sleep diary as well to distribute. That's no problem, or people can get it off our website.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd definitely be great. You mentioned, Tabitha, about co-sleeping, and that's something that, I had to do with Jude. I think it was about 10 or 11 when we finally got out of it. And the reason was he was waking in the night. And like you said, if I was in my own bed, by the time I got out and got to him, he was awake. And if I realised when I was sleeping next to him, what would happen is he'd sit up in the middle of the night and sort of look around a bit, and I could just lay him back down and cover him up again. And often he'd go back to sleep. So that worked. That got me and him more sleep more regularly than me sleeping in my own bed. But obviously we get to a stage where we don't want to be co-sleeping with our children, and I was lucky. We just seemed to grow out of it, and it worked. But I know for lots of families that's not the case, and they don't want to they don't want to sleep with their child. They want to spend the night in their own bed, and they worry that this is going to go on and on and on forever. So are there any tips to help with the co-sleeping side of things that can recreate maybe what they're providing?
For probably about half the world, co-sleeping is perfectly acceptable. I was chatting to an OT the other day who was from China. Well, she's actually Hong Kong Chinese, and she said that she used to co-sleep with her parents until she was 15. So
Right.
There is that to feed in. There is, but I do realise that some people really don't want to do it, and which is fair enough.
I think the first thing to say is, I think, again, it's sort of social pressure, isn't it? Like, people make assumptions or feel judged if they co-sleep or if they don't co-sleep. It's a hot potato anyway. But I think, we've worked with quite a few families where co-sleeping has served a really good purpose, but they've got to the point where it's not working for them anymore. Maybe the child's getting too old, or they're just more and more fidgety at night, whatever. So we look at different ways, and again, the starting point is where the family are at currently, and it's about what the goal is for that family, not what we think the goal should be. So, for example, in this scenario, it might be that the family is saying to us, we really want our son, who's 14, to be able to sleep in his own bed now, in his own room. But at the moment he's still in our bed. How on earth do we bridge that gap? So sometimes we suggest the parent puts a mattress on the floor in the child's room initially, so that they can have that proximity and be right next to the bed, or even they start by being in the bed but in the child's room. And then it's about having gradual steps to gradually remove that. So you might just get them used to you sleeping in the mattress on the floor right next to their bed, and then you could literally move the mattress very gradually further and further from the bed until it's out of the room, onto the landing, and so on. And the nice thing about that is you can do that as quickly or as slowly as you need to, or your child needs you to do that. So you could take several weeks, several months. If you know that that's your goal, but you're not in any hurry, then you can really take your time doing that. But you need to have a clear plan of what the steps are. So how frequently you are going to move away, move the mattress away. So you can do it very, very gradually, or you could do it over a few nights. So, it really depends. But it's that having a plan of what going from here to here looks like. So what all that middle bit needs to be to get from here to here. Because I think otherwise we're always thinking in these terms, aren't we? My bed, co-sleeping, and my own bed. And we don't think about, what's going to work in between. So I think the bit in between. I think the other thing is a lot of parents say to me, this is with slightly younger children, that they're just so exhausted that the child starts off in their own bed, but at some point comes into the parent's bed, or they bring them into bed in the middle of the night, but the parents are so sleepy they just can't quite notice it really. And sometimes we've just suggested things like putting a bell on the parents' bedroom door, so they're sort of alerted to the fact that their little one is creeping in to come and get into their bed, because they are that tired and they just need that ding ding ding, and then they just walk the child back to their bed and just have to do that as many times as is needed until the child gets the message that mummy and daddy's bed isn't any longer the option. But it's sort of thinking about what's doable really.
And I think also,
Yeah.
to alongside that, it's involving the child as much as you feel you want to or able to,
Yeah.
and so that there's no, so they know what's going to happen. So that it's suddenly like,
Yeah.
oh no, what are you doing now? And sometimes, this whole graduate retreat thing, it can happen over 1 or 2 nights, or as you say, it can happen over months. But what is really a good thing is to plan in some rewards within that. So if the child's done as you've asked, and the next day, first thing, give them a reward, whatever floats their boat, but have something, but so that you can use that as a reminder in the night. You'll get your whatever. I'm not a great fan of star charts, to be fair, because star charts, particularly for somebody who's got autism, what I do on a Monday night, is that going to affect what I get on a Friday? Probably not.
Right.
So it needs to be something immediate and tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also being clear with the wording on that, so what you're rewarding and because always make sure you're rewarding the thing they can control, not something they can't control. So you might be trying to say, you slept really well last night, I'm rewarding you because you didn't wake up at all last night, which isn't really fair because they can't necessarily control it, but what they can control is whether they come and try and get into your bed.
Yeah.
So you would reward, you did brilliant last night, you did not get into my bed at all last night. So again, it's really clear, like Jan said, as immediate as possible reward, and very clear reward of what they've got some control over. Is really helpful. The other one is social stories. So putting together a social story. So just introducing the concept that maybe you don't have to sleep in mum or dad's bed. You can sleep in your own bed. Because for a lot of children, if that's all they've ever known, why would they want to change that? And why would it occur to them to change that? So things like social stories can be really helpful in those situations to introduce a new concept.
And I don't know, the other thing that I would say is that if you suspect as a parent that there might be something medical going on as well, that just to bear that in mind, because we know that there's a real crossover with autism and sleep apnea, so difficulty in breathing at night, but also restless legs as well. So the child there will sort of be, complaining that their legs feel itchy. So just to sort of, you can go to your GP with those sort of concerns. So, and also for sleep apnea, you can ask the dentist to have a look in their throat and see if, there might be something else going on. So just to flag that, because, we obviously check it pretty much from the get-go, don't we, Tabs, when we work with our NHS patients. But, it's just something to flag that it could be something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think we assume, because we talk to other parents and find out that autistic children have sleep problems, and assume that that's the reason, when that there might be a medical side to it as well. A couple more questions. Gonna try and make them quick for you. Seasonal changes and the changing of clocks going forwards or backwards, or the nights getting lighter and darker. How can we help manage that? So I know that can be a real problem with families.
Yeah, I think we did a really neat handout on this, didn't we, Tabs?
I was going to say, I think we've got handouts for both clock changes.
Yeah,
so
really?
we can look at those.
We can let you have those.
We'll send you those as well. Yeah.
But it's sort of like fairly. You can sort of work with your child. So if they will, do a sort of complete change from the get go. It depends on the age of the child, but generally, when we go, when we get an extra hour in the autumn, it's sort of almost like a relief, isn't it, for a lot of, particularly for teens, I think, sort of, that plays to the, the good old GMT plays to that sort of later body clock. So it's not so tricky. It's the springtime, where you have to, lose an hour. It can be difficult. Yeah. And I think that it's about sort of a few days beforehand starting to shift that bedtime routine and the wake time as well slightly. If you want to do it in a very sort of gradual way, it's helpful.
Okay. So planning ahead and trying to
and I suppose And I was just thinking, a lot of families at the moment are saying to me, it's so hard to convince my child to go to bed when it's really light outside. And then they wake up 4 a.m. and it's light outside. Of course they want to start the day. So again, that's where, we talked right at the beginning about with bedtime routine, like associations and signals to the brain. So, just thinking about what you can signal to them that indicates nighttime. So, the curtains are drawn, all the lights are switched off, so point out the other things that indicate that it's nighttime as well. And of course, making sure the sleep environment is as conducive to a nighttime of sleep as possible. So blackout blinds, blackout curtains, I don't know, masking tape. So I've heard of people gaffer taping around the edges to get every last slither of light out. So, and really clear signals. So in the winter, the sort of opposite of that is in the winter, it's really important that we turn all the lights on in the morning and give the brain a really clear signal that daytime has started, because actually some of us are getting up before it's light. So when it's daytime, the lights are on, there's noise, mum or dad are happy to see you, they're engaged. Nighttime, everything's dark, things are quiet. Mum and dad become robot mum and dad. Nighttime is for sleep, daytime is for wakefulness. So all those kind of signals and messaging we can give can really help with that as well.
And what about us as parents who, obviously we're talking here about our sleep routines being disturbed by our kids and them being up in the night, but sometimes we struggle with sleep even when our kids are sleeping, either because we're so used to a disturbed routine, or maybe the stress and worries of life are on our mind, and we're struggling to sleep because we're worrying about the future or thinking about how hard the day's been. What are some general tips for us as parents, neurodiverse or not, that could help improve our sleep?
Well, I mean, certainly it's a bit more of the same, really. The good old regularizing your sleep, I think, is really important. So really making sure that you stick to your wake time. I know you will with your young person. So and if you have a lie-in and you work 9 to 5 on not 9 to 5, you work in the week. And you have your weekends off, then obviously bear in mind that if you are going to have a lie-in, try and have a lie-in on a Saturday rather than a Sunday, because if you have a lie-in on a Sunday, then it's going to make it very difficult to fall asleep at the right time and then get up at the right time. So, just to bear those sort of things in mind. I'd also say that things like if you wake in the night, I've mentioned it, if you wake in the night, just try and make a really cozy nest for yourself for about half an hour, whether that's with a book or somebody said that they found the ironing dolls. They went and did the ironing, but it's got to be really with no purpose. You've not got to sort of sit there and think, oh, yay, I've just got rid of the ironing basket.
Yeah.
I think that ironing is purgatory, actually, I think that, but there we go. Anyway, perhaps watch a TV program for half an hour. Some of the, the sort of the comedy programs are half an hour long. So just watch something that'll take your mind off it, then try and go back to sleep. But it is quite a common thing that if you've had disturbed sleep over years, then, you could very well end up developing insomnia. And certainly we treat a lot of ladies who are experiencing the menopause. So again, perhaps talking to your GP about HRT and things like that is helpful too. So it's sort of looking in the broader sort of sense of what might be going on with you. And the other thing is having a worry time. So if you are worried about things, treat yourself to a worry time, usually after lunchtime, just for about 10 minutes, and plan your worries out. What is the worry? Can you plan it out? Can you get some control on this? Just having that worry time, research indicates that it really helps, because you can then, when you wake up and your mind goes to inevitably, that dreadful thing, that dreadful scenario, or what happened earlier, or what's going to happen tomorrow, you can say, no, I've got my worry time and I'll deal with it then. So it's having that is helpful too. Sorry, we certainly recommend that for some young people as well. Sort of their cognitive functioning is okay. Just planning out those worries, sort of, and the whole thing around in school. Perhaps having a quiet time in school after lunch. Again, research has indicated that is hugely beneficial for academic scores as well. So it's all a bit of a win, really.
I suppose as well, I think for parents struggling with their sleep is, we're notorious for just like not worrying about ourselves, aren't we, in terms of not looking after ourselves. So it's very easy to be hyper vigilant for your child's sleep about doing all the right things, and then as the parent we don't make time to exercise or to get outside in nature or to do our worrying or to unwind because we've got 1,000 jobs we have to get done before we go to bed, or we go on our phones in bed. All the things that we know not to do for our children that we don't prioritize for ourselves. So I suppose, it's a good reminder to just be really kind to yourself as a parent and make sure you're looking after yourself to do all you can to promote best sleep. And I think it's easy to just let that fall by the wayside when you've got lots on your plate. So remembering to sort of look after yourself, that will have a good impact on your sleep as well.
Yeah, I definitely see an improvement in my sleep when I exercise, when I go to the gym, when I get outside and walk, go for walks. Getting to sleep then doesn't ever seem to be a problem. It's when the wake ups occur in the night, then getting back to sleep, even if Jude or Tommy have gone back to sleep or my dad has gone back to sleep, it's then me getting back to sleep. It's like I've had that wake up and I'm alert because I've had to do something. It's not just roll over and go back. I've had to get out of bed, do something, settle down, come back to bed. And then, my mind's racing, and that's what I definitely struggle with.
I think that there's definitely things you can do. And there are two schools of thought, basically, very broad brush, in that scenario where if you lie in bed, then you can do things like progressive muscle relaxation. There's also breathing techniques that you can use. Some people have said, blow a candle out 7 times, and then you don't remember the seventh time because you've fallen asleep. Because it's sort of really, if you think you extend that breath out 7 times, then it's but just a slow, long breath out. Then that's very helpful sometimes. But learning to do things like progressive muscle relaxation, perhaps in the daytime, so that then when you're half asleep, you can do that, is helpful. So there's those that want to stay in bed. There's others that, as I say, you clock that you're not going to sleep. And right, what can I do? Where can I go? And I'm going to try to go to sleep again in half an hour when I've calmed down, when I've, perhaps not so alert because everyone's gone back to sleep. So it's sort of having that space. And sometimes once you've overcome that wakefulness, it's just having that space in the room to say, that's my space where I go to sleep if I wake. And bearing in mind as well that everyone has a poor night's sleep now and again. So, it's about, but if you've got that regularity going on, then those are the really helpful things that you can do.
Yeah. I would definitely be trying the candle one tonight. When I wake up, I'll be doing this with 7 long breaths.
Yeah, how many candles do you have to blow out?
I mean, we could send the progressive muscle relaxation stuff to you. I'm not jotting these down, Tabs. I don't know they've used.
I'm keeping a mental note of which resources, because we've got some breathing resources as well.
We've got a breathing recording
I'll add them for everyone on the.
And it's great for kids as well, actually.
Yeah. Jan, Tabitha, thank you so much. I think this is going to be really, really helpful for the community. I think you've answered some, really great questions. Where can everyone find you? Where's the best place to go to find all these resources, follow you online? Where should they go?
So we've got our website, hunrosa.co.uk, HUNROSA. We're on Instagram, Hunrosa Sleep. We'll put the handle. Will you put the handle in the notes? Facebook. Like Jan said, people can go via the website to have that initial call if they want to with us. That's probably the best way to do it.
Good old fashioned email, info@hunrosa.co.uk. And the phone number is 01579 519990.
There you
Good
go.
memory, Jan.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, I'm sure people go to your website, they're going to get, there's some really good resources on there for them to use. Just before we go, is there any final tips you want to leave families to, what's something you want them to leave with, some knowledge that will help them either improve the sleep of their family as a whole, or just their outlook on the problems they're having?
I think it's important to remember you're not alone. And that if you think there's a sleep problem going on, complete a sleep diary. I'm going to recommend our app because it's all on there. A lot of the tips that we've talked about, are there. And talk to your health professional about having a sleep plan if you think there's something really complex going on. And we're always happy to chat to you.
Anything else from you, Tabitha?
Yeah, I think. I was just going to say, I just think know that you're doing an incredible job already. I think it's maybe that sounds passive, but I just honestly, every family I speak to with our work, I'm just in awe of what they're doing and managing and the parenting they're doing. So I think just know how brilliantly you're already doing. That it's really normal to have sleep struggles, particularly if you have someone in the household who's neurodiverse, and that is really normal and really common. But also that it doesn't mean it has to stay like that, that there are always things that we can find that can help and to make improvements. We don't suffer in silence.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's a really important point to finish on. Again, going back to the questions, a lot of it was, does it get better? Can it get better? And I think everything you've spoken about today shows that it is possible. And I know from my own experience with Tommy and Jude, it's very possible. So, well, thank you
again. There's always stuff you can do.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Quick one before you go. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, subscribe to the podcast, which will make sure you don't miss any future episodes, but will also help other people find the podcast too. In the show notes, you'll find links for the best places to find this week's guest and where you can connect with me. I'd love to hear what you thought of the episode, so tag me or DM me in all the usual places. Hope you enjoyed this week's story about autism.